Hello, Mr. Garza. The recording has started for today's meeting. Nice to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Very much appreciated. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Hello, Doctor.
Hello, how are you? Savita, good to see you.
Doing good, thank you.
Wonderful.
Your volume is a little bit low. Let me check mine before I.
Okay. I'll turn mine up. Is that better?
Yes, I hear echo. Chair.
I did too. Hold on. Let's see here.
Somebody has two devices, I think.
I do. No?
Savita, can you hear me? It's Teresa.
Yes, Teresa, thank you.
Yeah, someone does have two devices on. I can hear the echo.
Yeah. Closing.
Savita, can you mute everybody else?
Yes, let me handle that. Thank you.
Is that better?
Chair Garza, can you please speak?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
We
That's
still have the
terrific.
echo?
No.
Okay, good. Right. Right. I sent a note to Lisa. I don't know that she's going to, I've not heard from her. I know that she's going to be in the meeting. I'm not seeing her. Yeah, she's signing on. Never mind. All right, so. Savita?
Yes, sir.
I show that it's 3 o'clock,
Yes, sir. We can get started.
right? I'm hearing the echo though, are you?
I heard the echo too, and I think it may be the TV that's echoing.
Okay. Well, hopefully it will get past it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Give me a second. I'm having a computer issue. All right, ladies and gentlemen, how is that? That sounds terrible. Savita?
Savita's got the power, I think, to mute everybody except you, and I'm going to ask her to do that now.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, Savita, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you all right. There is some challenges that you're working on behind the scenes, but please proceed.
All right. All right. The recording has begun. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:01 on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. I am Sonny Garza, co-chair of the Livable Places Action Committee, along with Lisa Clark. I will now take this opportunity to call this meeting to order as a virtual meeting using Microsoft Teams. At this committee meeting, public speakers may speak up to 2 minutes when called during the time designated at the end of the agenda. For the moment, please mute yourself and turn off your camera during the meeting. If you're looking to join us via telephone, please use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Committee members, if you would like to speak during the meeting, please use the raise your hand feature or unmute and state your last name so that you may be recognized by the chair. Again, for those of you who are sitting in the meeting with us today, the raise your hand function is only for committee members. You can put your information in the chat, at which point we will call you at the end of the meeting. So committee members, please prepare to answer the roll. When I call your name, please respond by saying present. Sonny Garza, co-chair, is present. Lisa Clark?
Present.
Lisa Clark, co-chair, is present. Bradley Pepper? Or alternate Casey Morgan? Is not present. Curtis Davis? Curtis Davis is not present. Sherry Smith? Sherry Smith is not present. Dustin O'Neill or Sean Massick? Dustin O'Neill, Sean Massick are not present. Fernando Zamaripa? Fernando Zamaripa is not present. Jeff Kaplan? Jeff Kaplan?
Present.
Is present. Thank you. Kathy Payton? Kathy Payton? Kathy Payton is not present. Kirby Liu? Kirby Liu is not present. Fred Mathis? Fred Mathis is not present. Luis Guajardo? Luis Guajardo is not present. Matthew Camp? Matthew Camp?
I'm present.
Is present. Thank you. Megan Sigler?
Present.
Megan Sigler is present. Mark Nightingale?
Present.
Mark, thank you. I said Mike, apologies. Mike
Okay.
Mike Dishberger is present. Thank you. Neil Dykeman. Neil Dykeman is not present. Omar Isfar
Present.
Omar Isfar is present. Thank you. Peter Friedman. Peter Friedman is not present. Sandy Stevens.
Present.
Sandy Stevens is present. Thank you. Scott Kubler. Scott Kubler is not present. Steve Curry.
Curry, present.
Curry is present. Thank you. Toby Cole. Toby Cole is not present. Tyron McDaniel
Present.
is present. Thank you. Johanna Mahmoud
Present.
is present. Thank you. Zion Escobar
Present.
is present. That is the roll. Committee members, if any of you came on board during the roll call, please announce yourself now.
Curtis Davis is present.
Curtis Davis is present. Anyone else?
Sean Massock.
Sean Massock, thank you, sir. Anyone else? All right, that sounds like it. I show 15 committee members present. Thank you so very much. All right, we will now, I'm going to outline the meeting. I know you've been through this, but it's been a while, so I will do it quickly. For those of you who are here to participate in today's meeting, again, stay muted with your camera turned off to minimize background disruptions. If you wish to speak, enter your name into the chat and your name will be called in the order received. If you're using a cell phone, again, *6 to mute and unmute yourself. When the chair calls on any individual from the public to speak, please state your name and spell your last name out loud, unless the staff does that for you. A verbal recording of this meeting is important. Please speak slowly and clearly. Chat may not be used for anything other than public speaker request or basic staff administration agenda items. The hand raise feature, again, is only to be used by committee members and staff to identify their interest in making a comment. Public comments will be heard verbally at the end of the agenda. And again, please disconnect and hang up all devices right after the chair adjourns the meeting. So with that, I will hand the meeting over to Margaret Wallace-Brown for the director's report. Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see both of you and Lisa Clark again. Good to see all of you and all of the circles that I see on my Teams app here. It's been a while since we've been together, and I am really looking forward to the conversation today. We've got a couple topics that I'm sure we'll get lively discussion about. Thank you. I want to give you a couple brief updates about what we've been doing behind the scenes since we met last. Savita will go into detail about many of these, but just really quickly, I want to touch on the fact that the residential buffering ordinance amendments that you created and you recommended were approved by City Council and starting on February 25th. Those go into effect. And so we're looking forward to some good improvements for the way commercial and residential development coexist in our city. We're hoping for these improvements to make great improvements for our neighborhoods and for our commercial development. In addition to that, City Council has a public hearing tomorrow on conservation districts. I know we're going to talk about that today, but I want to remind everybody that if you don't get enough on conservation districts today, you can join the City Council at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, either in person or on Teams, and have more conversation about conservation districts. So I hope to see you there. And two other things we're working on closely with Houston Public Works. One, we've been meeting weekly on changes to the IDM based on the recommendations that are coming out of this committee. And we've made great progress. We hope that we will be able to announce shortly to you all that some of the IDM changes that really will support the work you're doing have been completed, and that they will be implemented over the summer. And so we're pleased with the progress we're making on the IDM. And then in addition to that, we submitted recommendations to the code review committees to make some changes to some local amendments to the International Residential Code and the International Building Code, specifically as it relates to the small scale development that you've talked about many times, the 4plexes, the 6plexes. Savita is going to go into detail on where we want those to be in Chapter 42, but we've also made recommendations for the codes so that these would be encouraged and would be easier to permit, still maintaining the life safety requirements that we believe is necessary, but we hope we'll get some traction with the code committee soon on those two things. So that concludes the updates that I want to give. I welcome everybody's input today. I know this is going to be a lively discussion. I want to encourage everybody, don't walk away feeling, gosh, I wish I'd said that, and not having spoken your piece or given us your opinion on something, because that's what we're all here for. So as always, if you have questions or want to talk with any of us directly, you can call the Planning and Development Department at 832-393-6600, or you can visit our website at houstonplanning.com and learn everything about what this committee's been doing for the past couple of years. So anyway, back to you, co-chairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wallace-Brown. Now, we will now, I'll turn this meeting over to Savita Bandy. Savita.
Yes, Co-Chair, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Savita Bandy, and I welcome you all to this meeting. On today's agenda, we have the first item is Conservation District's presentation, followed by discussion. After that, we will talk about overall housing recommendations and a quick update on what's happening. After that, we will talk about the homework activities and next steps, and then at the end will be the public comments. With that, I'll be we're ready to call on our next speaker, who is Roman McCallan, our preservation officer, to talk about and present the conservation districts for you. Over to Roman, please.
Thank you, Savita. This is Roman. Hello, everybody. Thank you for letting me join you today in this meeting. And hello, Chair, Vice Chair, and everyone involved. Let's see, if we'll just go forward through the slides. We have a few slides to present to you. As you know, the work that was done at this committee was turned into an ordinance, which I think represents what we discussed over those many, many meetings during COVID. But let's speak to what we ended up with. This is what we would call the benefits of conservation districts, is that they can protect the character, look, and feel of an area or a neighborhood. They can help to support compatible development and new construction. They might be easier to establish than other protections. They may promote livability, quality of life, and they're not restricted as a historic district to buildings of a certain age. They could include any age. Next slide, please. Creating the criteria. So the criteria that the Houston Archaeological and Historical Commission and City Council, according to this ordinance, would look at for creating them. The number one would be common streets. Well, these are not in order of importance. Common streetscapes, patterns, significant community sites or land use patterns creating an area identity, common patterns of improvements, landscaping, or building setbacks on property, common scale or bulk among buildings and structures, roof heights, location of garages or other building footprint elements. Whether a proposed district is an area that was planned or developed by historically underrepresented or disenfranchised neighborhoods or communities, the value of the area as an aspect of community sentiment or public pride. Next slide, because I believe there's another topic. The number one thing for this office, this planning department, in considering whether or not to move forward ever with any conservation district would be whether there was a desire by homeowners and residents to create a district in a given area. The next thing we would do is look at that area and see what's going on, development applications there, et cetera. It kind of really a question of how much pressure is on that neighborhood. Historical studies of the neighborhood and cultural institutions. An analysis of the area may confirm that there's consistent and identifiable physical attributes of cultural history and scale and development that can be preserved by protecting or enhancing one or more of those attributes. Whether an area is contiguous with a boundary that is logical, be that to a creek, street, subdivision line, utility easement, or other boundary. Other data relevant to consideration as a conservation district as determined appropriate by this office, Analysis may include determination of the number of the properties or of the size of the proposed district. Next slide, please. And there's only a couple more slides and then we'll take questions. Menu of standards. So we've much talk and effort went into this list here, which is not necessarily meant to be conclusive, though with a lot of discussion, it pretty much covers it all. Building height or number of stories, building size and massing. In other words, the general shape and form of the structures. Front-facing building features. What do you see from the street or the public right-of-way? Lot size and coverage, front and side building setbacks, off-street parking and yard parking, roof line and pit, paving and hardscape covering, general site planning, location of structures, primary and secondary on a site, architectural style and detail and building materials, garage entrance location, fences and walls, building relocation, demolitions, and alterations to existing structures or other desired characteristics of the built environment. It's important when we look at this to recognize, because there's been some public comment that these potential conservation districts would be more restrictive than the historic districts. I don't think that's a fair assessment, because when you create a historic district in our city, that area is then subject to a predetermined set of criteria for approval of alterations or of new construction. And that's the 11 criteria that is the bread and butter of this office. And it's that subjective criteria. That criteria includes all of these elements, but it's also subjective. It's not, in a way, measurable. So the historic districts, in my opinion, is a much more restrictive tool, because you have the subjective interpretation of all that criteria by the historical commission. Whereas here, a proposed neighborhood might choose just one or two things that they're interested in, that they feel that are impacting their neighborhood in a way that adversely impacts its character, for example. So they might just choose fences and walls and lot size and coverage, for example. We do know too, if anyone ever comes forward asking for only minimum lot size or minimum building line, we wouldn't take that effort forward, because if that's what they need, then they just use that existing tool that the city has. But so again, and then also further an important point is that according to the ordinance as drafted today, all approvals for work in the conservation district are done at the staff level. There are no items to be taken to historic commission unless it's really significant. For example, if a neighborhood were to determine that it wanted to protect certain buildings in that district from demolition, then a permit to demolish them, we believe, should rightfully go to the historic commission for consideration. But that decision of whether that would happen would be in that individual district's ordinance. It's not determined here. Nobody's getting any of these standards applied to anything in this city with the ordinance going before City Council's public hearing tomorrow. So next slide, please. Key points, again, based on input from communities and et cetera. And then we would work closely with property owners to determine the potential community support for and identify the character traits the community might be wanting to preserve. With the proposed standards determined, the office must hold at least one additional public meeting to present the proposed criteria for approval for whatever it is, whatever they're asking for, the regulation, if you will, and the map boundaries in a public meeting. That type of meeting has to, by law now, there's a notification process, there's mailings within 200 feet. So a lot of effort to make it as very visible as possible. Then after that public meeting, you have to have a ballot vote, and you're looking for 51% of owners for approval, and that's of tract owners in the proposed district, and it's affirmative votes. No vote is, if no one turns in a ballot, that's a no vote. If you have met the minimum 51% threshold, then it could go forward to historic commission. And then the commission must hold at least one public hearing, and city council must do a public hearing. All of those are subject to Chapter 211 of the Texas Local Government Code with respect to the notification process, which is quite extensive. We now do that process in this office for even local landmarks, which we take a couple a month, or probably one a month average, to the Historic Commission, and those now require a more robust notification process, even a landmark 1 structure. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, conservation districts would not affect ordinary maintenance, repair, or replacement of exterior features that are not structural, risks landscaping, plants, trees, etc. And it, again, just like unfortunately what happened out in Deer Park, and what has happened a few times lately in Glenbrook Valley, one of our historic districts, we've had a number of fires. When you're rebuilding after a fire or a storm or other natural disaster, if you're rebuilding on the same footprint, basically the same structure, there's no requirement to receive permission, a certificate of appropriateness from the commission. Also, anything on the interior of the home, and of course, the usage of the property is not regulated. Next slide, please. Just a little recap, but where we've had this as open for public comment up until, I think it's still open for public comment, but up to the 20th, we were keeping track. Here's a list of what we find. What we have done as first off is we've refined the wording on how potential conservation districts can be created and who initiates that process. It is not a planning department initiation. It's more of a planning department facilitation. And unfortunately, the language in the first draft that went out caused some confusion and a response appropriate that it did look like the planning department was going to initiate these. We have clarified that language in the draft that is available online. It's been there for a week or two. We clarified how the 51% buy-in is calculated, so that's just easier to understand. We added language requiring notification to property owners when changes are made to the proposed boundary map. So this gets to the question of, if we present one map in that public meeting and then the people vote and we determine we're going to redraw the boundary because it didn't get 51%, the ordinance specifies how we re-notify everybody of that. Finally, I'll just say that as of the 12th, and actually this is as of today because I've just checked all our comments, we've received 48 comments regarding the initial drafts. 36 of those comments were in support, 9 had questions or requested some changes, and 3 were in opposition. And I would be happy if requested to share that whole comment Excel spreadsheet to this group. And I could pass that through just to Vita if needed. I think that's everything. I think you got another slide. It probably just says questions. So turn on my camera and happy to take any questions.
All right, Roman, thank you so very much for that presentation. All right, so again, as a reminder, this part of the meeting will be questions from committee members for Roman. Again, the public will be invited to speak and ask questions at the end of the meeting. All right, so Tammy, are you there?
I am, yes, sir.
I really cannot see hands raised.
Curtis Davis.
See that?
Yes.
Are you able to help me with that or someone else?
Yes, and Curtis Davis has his hand raised.
All right, Mr. Davis, go right ahead, please.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you for your work. There were a couple of questions that I'm voicing from members of the Houston Housing Collaborative that were seeking some clarity. One was associated with the kind of potential challenge of the use of this mechanism as a form of NIMBYism in terms of restricting affordable housing development in a community. And that kind of came out of some things that recently happened at City Council. And the other, which was an older question, and we discussed it a bit when this first came about, was other than the planning board process, how might renters who are residents be engaged and non-resident property owners, how are they engaged different than resident property owners?
Sure. Mr. Davis, I'll take the second one first because we do plan, I don't remember if we've written that clear enough in the ordinance that when we do the notification, we would mail to the occupant of the address as well as to the property owner listed in Harris County Appraisal District records as the owner. So that would help a little with the renters, as well as, of course, just reaching out to Civic Club leaders and anyone that we, the super neighborhood group, the civic clubs, really just, anybody there. If that language isn't clear enough in the ordinance, we need to be sure that it is, because it's important as staff. There's language in the current ordinance about how you make a historic district, and just because staff have a lot to do, we tend to just follow those rules that we see. So I think it's important for us to double check that we've got as much clear language as possible to include renters and other people who are affiliated with the neighborhood but may not own the property there, or and that's where. Now on the NIMBYism, gosh, I feel could it be used as a form of NIMBYism? My short answer is yes, it could be. And then I would kind of turn that to say that an individual conservation district, though, might in some way, if the NIMBYism is, for example, against affordable housing, it might in some way. You mentioned, and I always say this, Mr. Davis, and the term is perfect, is, you said that this tool could possibly one day be used as a policy tool to affect other positive change. And given that we've recently finished a draft of a Freedmanstown financial incentive plan, which really meant for the whole city, it has a lot of tools in it that could be used to help people. And so, to the extent that yes, it could be. I even as of course, historic districts, I suspect initially were all about NIMBYism in this city, but I think, given that the individual conservation district ordinances that might one day come along, if this enabling ordinance passes, those ordinances can be specific. They're not. You do have to create an ordinance to make that district, and I don't think we have precluded the possibility of putting things in there that could actually support important matters like affordable housing, for example.
One
That's a vague answer, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, one recommendation, and I'm not sure how this is dealt with, whether it's administrative or whether it's regulatory. And again, this is where these things get difficult. And the last thing we want to do is bog down process. But if there is, during the review process of an application by staff, a NIMBYism test that can be applied with the understanding that conditions change, issues change, and I can't describe a specific scenario right now where a NIMBYism intent becomes obvious. But I think the question of having staff in their review of the application have some kind of a process for review. And that might include an open dialogue with the community so that there's a public meeting and people come up, and with the development community as well. That might be one opportunity to provide a formal step to sift for that. But again, to try and codify it, I'm not suggesting that it get in the legal language, because I just believe that would create more problems than not. But in the review process, having a step that would require that qualitative eye on the subject.
That hasn't been brought up, and it's a great idea. And if I could think of a way to quickly put something like that in it, I think it belongs there. So noted. We'll note that, and we'll note this. We also have the public hearing tomorrow, and we know we're going to regroup after hearing both of these comments and consider, possible changes to the ordinance.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you, Roman. So by the way, NIMBY is not in my backyard, correct? Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Tammy, our next speaker,
Next is Zion Escobar.
Zion Escobar, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me and see me okay? It's
Absolutely.
a bit
Go right
laggy
ahead, please.
on my side. Awesome. Well, hello, I am Zion Escobar. I'm one of the committee members for the Livable Places Action Committee, and I'm the executive director of the Houston Freedmanstown Conservancy. So Freedmanstown has been part of the conversation about conservation districts from the very beginning, and just have a couple of pointed questions I want to make sure I hear a clear answer on, so that I understand how to connect with community on these particular points. So this conservation district ordinance, if I understand it correctly, this is an enabling ordinance which would require a separate secondary customized subset for the Freedmanstown community if we were to advocate for certain features that we wanted to see upheld in our community, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and in that subset that would be customized just for Freedmanstown, would that preclude us from having things like the juxtaposition of preserving historic structures and ensuring that they aren't demolished on just the structures that are historic, that everyone agrees should be preserved, and have that juxtaposed to, hey, we would like a Freedmanstown market, we would like a community center, a performing arts center. Those two things can still exist in the conservation district and not be annihilated from each other, right? Along with affordable housing, duplexes, and things like that on currently vacant properties. All those things can still exist within this ordinance?
Yes. Yes. And because y'all are you're planning and you're organized, and you have the direction you would like to go, or you're forming that. I believe that in that case, it's even better because you can lay down the what's going on. For example, you have the few remaining contributing buildings to the original National Register district. So perhaps a proposed conservation district in Freedmanstown might indicate in that ordinance that the remaining historic buildings listed on the 1989 National Register of Historic Places designation will hereby be deemed contributing buildings in this proposed conservation district, and therefore may not be demolished without a certificate of appropriateness. That could be one line. That could take care of but then with respect, if vacant land, you decide what you could say, if this vacant land, if a piece of land is to be redeveloped for a performing arts center, then it is not subject to something another. For example, if you had give the good fortune of hiring Frank Gehry is the architect for that project, who likes to build titanium swirly things, and the Freedmanstown Conservancy would like to have something that juxtaposes against the amazing brick, authentic, original Gregory School, then you don't want to be that. You want to be able to raise money and build that building. So we would have to carefully word that ordinance that, is hereby determined based on the usage desired in some way, then this applies or that applies. So it would be carefully worded to go along with, and I would suppose you wouldn't bring it forward until you have a pretty good idea of because I'm right now on my desk, I've just got sent 18 articles on the Renaissance Corporation that I've been dying to read for a while to figure out how and why everything was 500 houses and buildings were demolished that were historic and contributing. But I would like, as you know, I would like what's left to stay and the infill to be appropriate and be a part of the wonderful, future history of the city of Houston and how we see that neighborhood. And I think this ordinance can do that.
One final question. As we evolve a plan, what I want to make sure is that we don't get stuck with passing an ordinance. And as the community evolves, as desires evolve, what is the flexibility for amending and augmenting or addressing things that maybe are there's little loopholes or things that are being done that weren't quite the intention? What is our ability to be able to revisit these kind of ordinances?
So I think are you talking about amending, let's say that you do create a conservation district in Freedom Sound and you were thinking in the future amending that ordinance? Or are you saying
Yes.
that this enabling ordinance allow people to amend an ordinance? Is that?
Just that is there a possibility for us to be able to, once we have our own, not be stuck with something that isn't appropriate 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if other things need to be done for affordable housing, for changes in demographics, things like that. How do we make sure we upgrade our master plan for the community and that this moves with us, not against us, and keeps us from a growth trajectory, a positive and healthy trajectory? We don't artificially restrict ourselves trying to protect and preserve, essentially.
I think I would like to, as staff, regroup on check the wording to be sure we have a clearly defined path to amend, even in this conservation, even in this enabling ordinance, that we're clarify how you amend a future possibly
Thank
create.
you.
Double check that.
Thank you. That's my last question. Appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
Zion, thank you so very much. Thank you, Roman. So there will be a process for making amendments going into the future.
My first instinct is that the city can always, I remember the director telling me, you can always amend and retract an ordinance anyway. But I think just like I'm saying how staff tends to look at something, although why don't we clearly have a line or two about that if legal thinks that's appropriate in this current draft that's going to city council now, so we make that. So that when someone raises a question, some future staff member 40 years from now says, oh, no, that's the way it is. You can't do it. We don't want that.
All right, thank you. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Lisa Clark.
Co-Chair Clark, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to go back to Mr. Davis's question about notifying.
Lisa, excuse me. Could you turn your volume up? We can't hear you very well.
Good if I move now.
Bottom of the right-hand screen, bottom right should be down there. Little speaker. No? Okay, well, just get closer and speak louder.
Okay, I'm trying to speak really loud, so if I sound like I'm yelling, I'm sorry. I'm just going back to Mr. Davis's question about notifying renters and what did he say? Renters and non-residents. I looked at the ordinance that was drafted on 2/13, and it only references property owners being notified.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to address that, that does need to be corrected.
I agree. Thank you, Chair. I wrote in a note of that, and I put in ordinance. So I think that, again, we need a way to be clear that again, future staff, because I think this staff here would try, but regardless, make it in the ordinance to be clear that an effort is made for that type of outreach.
And then my next question, if you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
To the voting of property owners. If I own a whole block, and there's a 2-block submitted, I own a whole block and 4 or 5 property owners own property on the next block. How many votes do I get as the owner of all of that?
If your properties on the one block are side by side, let's narrow it down a little by saying one block face, maybe. For example, if you own a block face, that would be 1 vote. Now that exists in our current definition under city law. The tract is defined. I think there could be some room for interpretation, but the way we're currently interpreting that, contiguous adjacent tracts would be 1 vote. But even it's kind of oddly, if you were interpreting it another way, if you owned 3 lots and then not 1 lot and then 2 lots on the same block face, that's 2 votes, because according to that definition.
And there's no room to adjust that, because I'm looking at that as not being an equal voting measure, frankly.
Equal, I don't know. I mean, I don't know which side you mean unequal to, but the thing is, I remember that when it was discussed about Independence Heights, it was discussed at HHC in this way. They said, well, then a developer might get that helps, because if a person is going to develop 8 townhomes or 10, or they've got several lots, then they only get possibly 1 vote for that contiguous piece. was the thinking, but I bet you got another way of looking at that.
Well, I look at it as it should be done maybe on a square footage basis, because I may not be a residential developer, maybe I'm a commercial developer. And if I own 10,000 square feet and someone only owns 2,000, I should get more than one. That's my comment.
Director, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, right now, the way the enabling legislation is worded, it follows the way that historic districts were created. If we hear from either this committee or the public hearing tomorrow that there are better ways, or that the community prefers a different way, we would certainly consider it. As Roman said, after the public hearing tomorrow, I mean, that's what public hearings are about. Let's hear what the community says and then regroup and see maybe there are some amendments or some changes that need to be made to the draft. So I would suggest, if you've got a great formula that you think works, give it to Roman or me today, Lisa, or come speak at the public hearing tomorrow. And we'll, as we review the comments, we'll review it. And maybe it works better than what we have.
Okay, thank you. But I am lodging my comment right now. And I will go into public comments and make that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Megan Siegler.
Megan, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, please.
I have some questions just about the purpose of our committee and how we got to this point, and the fact that this is the first time as a group we're really talking in detail about what this ordinance says and what it means. And I'm just surprised we're moving so quickly and that it's going to be heard at council tomorrow. What is it that you want out of this group today, Margaret?
Good question. Thank you. And what I want out of this group today is exactly what we're getting, which is questions and comments and thoughts. And we will combine those with what we hear tomorrow with a public hearing. The ordinance is not scheduled for city council yet. This is the hearing process, the hearing from you all. And so what I want to be able to do is, consider all of what we're hearing today and we'll hear tomorrow, and then make recommendations for amendments to the mayor. The mayor supports this ordinance as drafted right now. And we will be talking with him about, about the comments from the public hearing. And so we'll make whatever changes he agrees to, but we are happy to, consider everything we're hearing now. I think Curtis Davis had some good suggestions. I know Lisa, I think Lisa Clark's suggestion was terrific. If you've got suggestions on how to make it better, happy to hear it.
I think I'm wondering if even the process, I know it seems like it's already in process, but there was some ideas of maybe doing a test area. It just seems like for something so important, we're really moving through this quickly. The presentation that Roman just gave was great, but the devils are always in the detail. And I just think if we could take some time, really study this. I love the idea of a focus area where we try it, we get it right. Maybe avoid some of the mistakes that could be made, see where we could make things stronger. That would just be my suggestion, that we all really think long and hard before we give something consensus that we really haven't had time to properly vet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Matthew Camp.
Mr. Camp. Mr. Camp, are you there? I'm not hearing him.
I'm here. Sorry.
There.
Couldn't get the mute undone.
Go right ahead.
A couple questions. One, Roman, you mentioned earlier that there is tax incentives for Freedmanstown coming up. Does the city have any incentive for anything, any conservation district that pops up? I know there's a lot of kind of rules and kind of restrictions, but what are we doing as far as another carrot to people that may have reservations about joining a conservation district or voting yes, if it's going to add additional burdens on their property.
Okay, thank you. So you're referring to the comment that we did work on a preservation financial incentive plan here, and it lists a lot of ideas, and it's really, to call it a plan is a little deceptive. It's more of a thought piece on what any city could give, what Houston can do, and specifically in the case of that, we actually talked to people that own property in Freedmanstown and what they thought they needed to preserve them. But none of those were none of that. I have no assurances that'll be executed upon. That said, I'm glad you reminded me that I talked to the director about this, or someone at least recently, that the need to have maybe expressly called out in this current enabling ordinance, as is called out. So the historic tax credit that the city presently has for historic property, it's called out in the historic preservation ordinance we now have. It states that the city may have a program to reduce property taxes or something like that on properties in its designated historic districts. I want to be sure, and actually I don't think we have any language such as that in this enabling legislation, but I think it belongs there because that goes back to what I was saying to Mr. Davis, that I believe that this should be used potentially as a policy tool, especially, I mean, the fact is that in the older parts of the city, if applications come out of the so-called disenfranchised areas of Houston, we know that there are a lot of historic resources there that are in terrible shape, and that the families and people who own them struggle to take care of them. So I'd like to see it used in a way. I'd like to see the city pass something, and at least in this ordinance, Mr. Camp, we should have that wording in there. And again, this then could be, because we might have I've had interest in conservation districts expressed from practically every corner of the city, including neighborhoods that aren't as socioeconomically disadvantaged and where they may not need that as a tool. So I again come back to the individual conservation districts that might get created, that's where that language should live, because they are customized and they have different concerns or challenges.
Okay. A second question was, during the walkable places, there was always a discussion of a kind of a variance process to maybe adjust for someone that is not able to meet some of the new standards. Is there a process for the conservation districts to have a variance to kind of add that somewhat level of flexibility in the system for either non-conforming structures or, to really kind of alleviate a big burden on a property?
I'm not familiar enough to know, but are you talking about like where someone can pay something instead of doing a sidewalk?
Well, it's not really the in lieu fee, but it's if there is a architectural standard that the house or neighborhood, their district is basically a craftsman style, and somebody has a mid-mod home, are they going to be required to fully redo their whole theme of the building, or is there a variance? How does this process work for something that's really non-conforming?
No, well, I mean, there's never, it's just, and that's, there's again, in the historic district ordinance that's specified, but there's no duty to act that comes out of this ordinance. It's not about telling people to change things. There's no duty to act. So it doesn't.
Yeah, it's not requiring it, but if you did do a remodel or an addition, would that addition be required to meet those standards of that if it's, extremely burdensome or non-conforming? I mean, if
burdensome. So, well, I think again, the individual ordinance could potentially require that an alteration to a house conform to certain design criteria, for example. But that could happen. that could be. And then the question, so I think then you're asking then if it's the burdensome clause, and there is a clause in our historic ordinance, and we haven't talked about a burdensome clause, so we'll take that into consideration as well. But by that, what I mean is that the current historic district ordinance states that the historic commission shall take into consideration the economic impact on an applicant with respect to their application.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew, is that the end? Is that the end of your comments?
Yes, for now. Thank you.
Roman, did you have anything else before we move on?
Chair, I do not. I see a question in the chat.
We still have 3 hand raises.
Yeah, we'll get to them in a minute.
Yeah.
We're going to let our speakers go first. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next speaker is Sean Massock.
Sean, are you there?
I am.
Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, the question I had was in regards to if there's any areas within the boundaries of one of these proposed districts that already has some restrictive covenants already in place, how would precedents, if there's any conflicts between the two, be resolved? Would that have to be part of that ordinance as it's written, or would the predecessing one, in others, the district, the restrictive covenants rule despite for a portion of that area should it move forward?
So, excuse me, you're talking like maybe deed restrictions or the building line, that sort of thing?
Yeah, deed restrictions, some kind of restrictive covenants, whether it's deed restrictions, et cetera, of a portion of an area that ends up going in for, an ordinance. In other words, it's maybe 40% of that 51% vote. So, but they're in that boundary.
Certainly fair. Roman?
We've talked a lot about the deed restriction relationship with various people. And I can't say that we're not going to take away anything that's in a deed restriction, obviously. I'm going to ask if the chair is there if she could take that question on the deed restriction, if an area already has some. And you're right that it could be addressed in a specific ordinance for a neighborhood, especially if perhaps part of a neighborhood's covered by deed restrictions and maybe the proposed district includes some that's not. So you definitely then would have to address that there.
Yeah, that's the specific, is part of it's got the deed restriction, but part of it doesn't, of the proposed district.
We try, and our current historic district ordinance doesn't actually just talk about deed restrictions yet. We have North Hill Historic District and Glenbrook Valley among 2 that have strong neighborhood associations with deed restrictions, and we work with them. We consult with them. But they, the deed restrictions, as far as I know, that's why I asked for if someone else could chime in. I think that they trump, if you will, the rules. So whatever, that's where I would go with that.
This is Margaret. Let me try to answer that by saying that, I'm sorry. Is that okay? I'm sorry. The city of Houston has no authority to override deed restrictions whatsoever. And so if the deed restriction is established in any or all of a conservation district, those deed restrictions would prevail. And, typically how we look at minimum lot size and minimum building line is that it only, quote, trumps deed restrictions if it's more restrictive than what the deed restriction is. And so I think we would have to carefully look at the land, the restrictions on the land, and the menu of items that the neighborhood was asking for before it actually got created. So we would be able to make that clear to the residents exactly what the restrictions were on each of those different pieces of neighborhood.
All right, so Sean, let me ask a question. This may be what you're asking. So as an example, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but if there are 2 neighborhoods and they're both going to be part of the conservation district, but one has deed restrictions and the other does not, could the could this be used to put deed restrictions on the neighborhood that doesn't have them? In other words, you'd still have to go through the deed restriction process. This would not allow you to do deed restrictions, I don't think, would it? They're not listed in the menu standards.
Right.
No, it would, yeah, no, it would
I
not allow you to do deed restrictions. Some of the restrictions, though, might be similar to
Yeah.
what deed restrictions would have, such as a minimum lot size or a building line or something like that. But
Right.
in the same way that we have minimum lot size programs, it would not extend deed restrictions to areas that don't currently have them.
Right,
Yeah, I
Sean, was
would
that kind of
say
your
if-
question?
It was kind of the opposite of how you mentioned, more as if
Oh.
the piece that has the deed restrictions get more restricted by the new ordinance, which, I guess, which would trump, with the new and let's say currently it's a 20-foot front yard setback and the new one becomes a 30-foot front yard setback. Obviously, that's a greater restriction on the area that had a deed restriction. If that was the piece, would 30 feet now be the rule if something was undeveloped, but it's in that deed restricted area that allowed a 25?
Margaret?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I think it's all in how the community. No, I don't. Well, first of all, the building line's going to be.
That may have been a bad example, but you know what
No,
I mean.
I think it's probably a good example, and I think it's one we need to research and get a better answer for, because I don't have a really good answer for it.
Okay.
Thanks, Sean.
We might want to take a look at that simply because, people and planning department, we all consider deed restriction sacrosanct. So,
Yeah.
the question is more restrictive, might be good, but then again, it may not. And so I think that's Sean's question now that I understand it better. Thank you, sir.
And I just say that if a neighborhood brought that forward, we would be very sensitive to that. I mean, we have to be sensitive to that because we don't want to pass a future district ordinance that we're going to have legal trouble with or that's hard to understand. So just even in staff working with that neighborhood, we're going to be attuned to the potential problem we could create for ourselves or anything. So,
Sean, that was a great question. Thank you so much. All right, Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Mike Dishberger.
Mike, there.
Hey, yep, I'm here.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I'm concerned about, first of all, I agree with what Lisa talked about the voting. I think it should be based on size of property. I could see someone owning a couple acres and people with 2,500 square foot lots getting outvoted, or that big property gets sucked into the district. Historic districts, they have done that sometimes, and they grab a property that's empty and just put it on there because they have enough votes to do that. Just don't like that. I'm telling you, my biggest thing, I'm not against conservation district to start off with. I think it's a good idea. Need some filling in here. It's notification. Purchasing property. The way this reads is we won't know. If you're trying to buy a property in one of these areas that possibly may happen, you don't know it's even happening, and all of a sudden, bam, comes out of planning. This whole area is marked off as a conservation district, possibly, which then puts it on a long path, which according to the ordinance could go up almost to a year. No more permits, no more demo. You could be in the middle of getting something permitted, the way this reads, the middle of getting something demolished tomorrow, and it has to stop. I'm just looking for some better notification. I'm not exactly sure how that could happen, but it's almost like, can you give everybody 30 days notice that this area is being considered? Because if you think about it, if someone doesn't want some affordable housing in their area, they could just say, tell you what, we think we want to do all of Acres Homes, which is 9 square miles, right? And with no possibility of ever getting it, but it puts everything on a hold for a minimum of 180 days. And while planning will sit there and say, hey, we should knock the area down to something more manageable. I'm just concerned about that. The property rights of owners, those who have land under contract or just closed on some property, open to build. I know that there's affordable builders in our organization that put together properties in the 3rd Ward. There's a big one down there, and they're concerned about that, trying to piece together properties, and all of a sudden, bam, you're being lined into a conservation district. So I would like to see some more work done on that. That's probably our biggest, my biggest thing, just the notification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Roman, any comment? Any comment, Roman? You're muted.
I'm sorry. We'll look at that. The chapter 211 requirement is strong, but it doesn't mean we can't strengthen it further. And bring this up as we review internally if there's anything else we can do to strengthen that.
Okay. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Megan Siegler again.
Megan, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are public lands, how will they be treated? Public owned lands?
Margaret? Megan, do you have a specific?
I think I know I think I know her answer, her question. And we have not, that is something we didn't even really consider in this ordinance. And it's something that's on my list of things to look at. It came up yesterday or today, I can't remember when. Specific, her question is, in historic districts, public lands are not allowed to be counted as voting for the creation of districts. And this ordinance is silent on that. And it was something we didn't even discuss until today. So I'm sure it will be a change as we move forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Megan?
And also just, we touched on the deed restrictions. What about other city ordinances? Is that also I would assume it would be the more restrictive if you do have a district, but within that district, there is a, prevailing lot size, prevailing building size, or when a historic district and a conservation district overlap. How is that managed?
I believe the most restrictive is what applies generally. And also, it's just a note that historic districts, we have a few that are pretty small, and the ordinance does state that while an existing historic district under this draft may not be changed into a conservation district may overlap a historic district. And so if you could imagine that, then I think I have my answer, at least in terms of those. So the historic district will still have its code that it must follow. And then the area outside of it would be subject to whatever that new conservation district says. But if I'm not mistaken, there's almost a general blanket you see in the code in various places where the more restrictive applies. If there's a conflict between this and something, you often see the more restrictive applies, Director, is that a good answer?
Yeah, I guess that leads me to something that we haven't said, but that Roman and I know, so that I guess we need to articulate to everyone, and I'm not sure how this hasn't come across. Maybe we just missed the boat on this. So when you look at this list of standards, it is a generic list of things that a community may choose to put into their conservation district. But the conservation district creation language is not simply going to say building height. It is going to establish a standard for building height. It is going to establish a standard for where garage entrance locations should be. It will be, so I'm making this up, but perhaps in a conservation district, it will say all front doors must face the street. No buildings may be over 3 stories. That type of thing. So while you're looking at this list today, it is a very amorphous list that could be anything, but as the district is being created, because remember, we're not creating districts with this enabling ordinance. As the district is created, there will be metrics placed on each one of the items that the community selects. And so when the community votes on that, when property owners make decisions about that, they will know 3 stories, street facing doors, they will know building lines will be established, 20 feet, 25 feet, whatever that established number is. It won't just simply say, we're going to deal with building lines in this conservation district. So I think that's a piece that we understand, but we haven't made clear to all of you. And that's been a failure on our part, I think, in that we haven't been able to articulate that clearly.
So I think I still have some confusion then, unfortunately, on the application process. So if it's the neighborhood is coming to you possibly saying this is what we want to do, or the district, but what role does your staff play in this?
We will work with the neighborhood to establish what those standards are within that district. And we'll use, our good planning sense, we'll use our training, we'll use our experience to help the community establish what they want.
Okay, so the application, it doesn't say, this is your setback, this is your height, this is your architectural style. That's something that they're working with staff on?
Yes, and that would be established through the collaborative back and forth in these public meetings with the community before we sent it out to the community for a vote.
Is this going to look like another, you have what, development services, neighborhood services? Is this coming under neighborhood services, or will this be, I'm just curious how you're planning on staffing.
So let's keep going with what I said about, let's just say it's 3 stories. That's the only standard they choose, is a 3-story building height. So that's established for a district, and when a property owner applies for a permit, the fact that it is in a conservation district is flagged in the permit process. The permit review, whether it's in, depending on where the standard falls in the review process, the person reviewing the process is going to look at the conservation district and say, oh, this building has to be no more than 3 stories. So is that in the permitting center? It could possibly be, if we're talking about building lines or lot sizes, it could happen in the platting process. So which staff person actually does this depends on what the standard is and where in the development process that takes place.
So if it's something like the 3 stories, the restriction, I guess I'm going back to translating it to how, when someone's purchasing in a district, is the guideline the same as minimum lot size, minimum building line, where the county is notified and then your website is where homeowners, developers, anyone that is looking to purchase property should go to find this out before it's truly on their title report?
Yes, the ordinance calls out the same process we use for minimum building line. We will have all of this recorded in the Harris County deed records. We will have it on our My City. We will have all of our staff, looking at this as they're looking at plats. And we will, it'll be publicly displayed on our website for potential property owners.
Starting at an application.
Yeah, starting at, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Roman can correct me. I think it's starting at the first public meeting.
Okay.
Not public hearing, public meeting.
That's correct.
Okay.
So is the first public meeting, is that before the application, or does the application come first and then the public meeting?
The first public meeting is really the first clear understanding that there is going to be a process to be filed. There is no form, so to speak, that's an application form. There's not a petition. We could get a phone call from a neighborhood that says, we'd like to talk with you about that, and we'll have a conversation back and forth, but it's not until we go and meet with the community for the first time that any of this is established as kicking off a process.
Okay.
Megan, is that all?
Yes, I think so. Thank you for now.
Yeah, of course. Tammy, our next speaker.
Next is Omar Isfar.
Omar, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I have a comment and then two questions. My comment is that, I'm hearing some concern about the idea that there will be a development freeze in place prior to city council action or prior to us even really knowing what the final outcome or the final form of a conservation district proposal will look like. And I think that this concept is a little bit different from other districts that we have in the city, like historic districts and special minimum lot size areas. And I appreciate the comparison and the reliance on Chapter 211 of the local government code, which has to do with changes to zoning districts. And, in that context, zoning districts and zone changes don't really go into effect or never go into effect until city council takes final action on them. And in the case of a historic district or a special minimum lot size area, we have a specific proposal to follow a specific set of rules, a specific lot size, or a specific requirement to get a certificate of appropriateness that perhaps in some situations it may be appropriate to go into effect on a trial basis before city council takes action. And so with that being said, my questions are, could you estimate, knowing that the request or the proposal to create a conservation district can be a big one or a small one, it might be a fairly heavy lift or it might be pretty easy, about how long it would take the department to come up with a design guideline or what you have perhaps estimated internally? And also, how important is it to you from a conservation perspective to have just a general development freeze in place while the department understands the request and drafts design guidelines? Is this the kind of thing that could go into effect once city council adopts it?
Well, we have, thank you for the question. Estimated time. So in the current draft of the ordinance, there's section 33-605, and it's called restrictions on development pending designation. And it very much mirrors the historic district ordinance. And it says that building permits for new construction, demolition, or alterations shall be granted. Shall be granted until 181 days. That wording is a little questionable there. It was supposed to be shall not be granted, but till 181 calendar days has elapsed, or council has made a determination not to enact the district, or the commission has made a negative recommendation. So that's obviously then saying whatever the 181 divided by 30, help me out there, y'all, is that 6 months?
It's 6.
Yeah, 6 months. So, and then there's a reference in there to say that number can go up if the commission or I believe the city council defers the application for a period of time, and then it goes up to 241 calendar days as a potential. That's where so that's kind of the estimated time question. But how important is it to have a freeze in place? That's a very, when I think about the historic ordinance, which has that language in it, the history of historic preservation often includes that that a community got upset about the loss of or the potential loss of a historic resource. So I know that clause in our ordinances stems from for when the communities get worried about losing a building and they'll try to pass these ordinances. So, Houston, the preservation movement really got going after the demolition of the Shamrock Hilton Hotel. But, and it, of course, gone by the time it passes. But that's the idea of that language, that people are actually there. And I think in the case of conservation districts, we're not normally, I really are not seeing us as that is not, although development pressure is upon certain neighborhoods that are desiring probably this tool, it isn't to save a specific structure. So how important is it to have a freeze in place? Is a good question. And in fact, I remember early on in discussions that I had suggested that it wouldn't be necessarily that bad if those didn't happen, and if city council approves a potential district. So I'm flexible there, but that could be something we look at. If that's a concern, that those freezes. But I think this language is a little bit tied to the history of historic district ordinances, which I know often across our state have been triggered by people. And I'm involved in something like that when I'm not here. I've taken some vacation time to address the demolition of a historic hotel in Palacios, Texas that doesn't have a preservation ordinance, but many of the citizens are wishing they did, because they may lose this great big historic wooden hotel down there. But this ordinance isn't really about that. It's about typically talking about specific structures. So it's something that, if that is something that gets voiced as a concern, Omar, are you suggesting that it should not necessarily have the freeze in place?
I'm not really suggesting one way or the other. I'm just thinking through what, Margaret's comments and your comments about how we don't necessarily know what a conservation district design guideline is going to look like until we've had a chance to study it. And as a result, the proposal on the table is to freeze sort of all development activity for a time period, which is different from the proposals that we have that are built in, different from how we treat a special minimum lot size area, for example, where we know specifically what the regulation entails and we implement it on a trial basis after receipt of an application that tells us exactly what is being proposed to City Council. And I understand the concern that while the application is pending, there could be motivation to act quickly before City Council acts. And I think in those situations, that motivation to act quickly is still being done by those actions are still going to be taken by people who own property currently and perhaps have pending development plans that, in those situations, the comments I'm hearing are perhaps those types of property owners should not necessarily be adversely affected by pending proposals that an ordinance that gets adopted by City Council or design guidelines that get drafted should apply to projects going forward after a date where we have a chance to discuss, what those proposals are, whether they're a good idea, whether City Council approves of them, and then the rules go into place. It's different when we don't really know what the rules are going to be. Therefore, we freeze all development, which even in a situation like a historic district or a minimum lot size area, it doesn't freeze all development. It just freezes development that's incompatible with a specific proposal that goes into place at a certain set of, at a certain time. And that's just really my comment.
Good point, Omar. Thank you.
Extremely good point. We'll take it into consideration. Yeah. And I think addressing it, if just to say to Megan Siegler and Mike Disberger's comment, then if you didn't place the hold, now you have a 6-month heads up that is going to be pretty much out there in the public. We have all the public notification. We have a lot of things. We got to go to City Council. So that anyway, that's something we should look at, I believe. Thank you.
Omar, anything else?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Tammy, our next speaker.
There are no further hand raised, but like to draw attention to the chat. There's an HREC letter that is uploaded that's dealing with conservation districts and the topic that we've been discussing.
Right. I see that. Is there any other questions in the chat that we need to consider at this point in time? No. All right. And I meant by committee members, apologies. So Roman, I do have a question, and that is when we brought up the idea of the vote, that renters and homeowners will be invited to participate, but does that mean that renters and property owners each get a vote? How would we know? So only the property owners get a vote, but renters, inhabitants of the area will have a voice when the standards are being put together. Is that correct?
Yeah, everyone could have a voice in that process. And I'm sorry that it's not that, I mean, if someone can think of a way to legally have the renters have a vote in the voice, but I think it's difficult. But as for certain, all the public meetings and discussions can be to anybody.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that I had misunderstood, and I thought surely that can't be right, because then you wouldn't know how many residents you have. You'd have property owners and then lots of other votes from renters who, anyway, so that answered my question. Thank you. So everyone has a voice in the preparation of the standards. Only property owners have a vote. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Committee members, any other questions before we move forward?
I actually have one quick thing I'd like to say,
Yes,
and that is I am grateful for this conversation, for this very long debate we've had on it. I taken copious notes, and I'm grateful. Thank you for the input, the commentary, the criticism, the questions, everything. That it will help us make a stronger ordinance when it is time for it to go forward. So thank you. As always, this committee delivers.
Thank you, Director Wallace Brown. All right then, Subida, do we go back to you?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead, please.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is overall housing recommendations update. The last week I sent some documents along in the email, 3 of the documents, out of which one is called the overall housing recommendations, and the other one is called the tabular format. The third document was called the side-by-side, which is the ordinance preliminary draft language. I just wanted the committee to be able to see what's happening with the overall housing recommendations and where we are at. So that was the purpose of sharing all of the information that we have available, and legal is working on the ordinance language at this time. I just wanted to see if there are any questions. So based on the document that we provided, I would like to take any questions you may have on one piece at a time. So do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So recommendations for proposed second dwelling unit for second dwelling units. And I wanted to see if you all had any questions for the second dwelling units.
Committee, do we have questions? Subida, could you put that the previous information back up? The previous slide. I have to take my glasses off to read it. So yeah, can everyone see that pretty well? There, actually, that's really good. All right, so first of all, let's just go. Why don't you, Subida, if you don't mind, without reading the whole thing, just do a walkthrough of each thing. Just basic overview. We don't have to get into specifics, and then everyone will have a good idea of what we're talking about, and then they can come back and see if I read this last week, and so I don't remember my question. So you may trigger a question for me, if you would.
Okay, great. So if there is an existing dwelling unit on a lot right now, per Chapter 42 definition of single family, a second unit is already allowed on the lot. However, if we are proposing a second unit on a property, the second unit has to be no larger than 900 square feet if it is a detached unit. With the changes in the recommendations, what we are doing is we are eliminating that 900 square feet size limit on the detached unit. If you think about a duplex, there is no size limit when it is 2 units being built on one property or one lot. However, when it is detached, there is a size limit. So that's one of the changes. And in doing so, we do want to allow more housing to happen. So we do want to allow more ADUs. These are also called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which we discussed. We are calling them second dwelling units in preparation as we go with the language. But when these second units happen, we don't want multiple curb cuts to happen along with them. So we are saying that the same curb cut or the same driveway that gives access to the property or to the main unit also provides access to the back unit, unless the property is at a corner. If the property is at a corner, then there could be one driveway from each public street frontage. So that's one of the main things in this portion. And in terms of parking, today 900 square feet unit needs one additional parking space. However, we have learned from our permitting team that a lot of times they hear concerns about that additional parking because there is not enough room on the property for that additional parking. So based on the second unit size, if the original unit has 2 spaces already, based on the second unit size, if the unit size is less than 1,000 square feet, no parking, additional parking is needed. If the second unit is 1,000 or 1,500 square, 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, then there is one space still needed. And if the second unit is larger than 1,500 square feet, then 2 spaces will be needed. And in looking at this, you can already see that we are trying to still encourage smaller additional units, but it is possible to add larger units if you have adequate room for that additional parking. And if the property is in proximity to any of the transit options, like let's say high frequency bus routes or train stations, the boost routes or any park and ride facilities, we want to promote other modes of transit. And that's why we are making market-based parking area rules. So therefore, there will be no city minimum parking required if you are within half mile of these other modes of transit, or if you're in quarter mile distance from high comfort bike paths or B-cycle stations. And the required parking doesn't have to be underneath the unit. It can be on the property, but separate from the unit. So that's pretty much the gist of this portion.
All right, that's a great overview. Thank you. So committee members, are there questions about secondary dwelling units? We've discussed this for a while, and now you're seeing basically what the language is going to look like. So
Omar
again,
Isbar. Oh, sorry.
Omar, go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, and apologies if this has been addressed previously, and I may be very wrong about this, but my understanding is that it's very difficult to separately meter a secondary dwelling unit or the second unit within a duplex for utilities. And is it the city's intention that the residents of a second dwelling unit be able to get separate utility bills? And if so, how would the city prevent those units from being sold without like a subdivision plat? Or is it okay with the city that those units get sold, or are they intended to be leased primarily?
The purpose of this ordinance, or at least the intent of this, is for the homeowner to live in one of the homes and then rent the additional dwelling unit. The intent is not for property owners to bypass the subdivision of lots and just sell by meets and bounds. That is not the purpose. That's not the intent. However, we do know that sometimes it does happen, and it probably in future also may happen. In terms of the water meters, it is possible to serve both the units from the same meter, and it is also possible today to get 2 separate meters. Both possibilities are available today. We would like for it to be 1 meter serving both the properties.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tammy, anyone else?
Nobody else.
Okay. Last chance, boys and girls. All right, Savita, let's move on to multi-unit residential developments. This
Okay,
is
so
very
the
exciting.
next one. The next one is multi-unit residential developments, or the short form is called MURs. We had a lot of discussion on these type of developments where we want to allow, if the property is unrestricted, that means there is no deed restrictions, and if the property is unrestricted, so more than one unit, to be able to build more than one unit is already possible today. However, for Chapter 42, if somebody decides to build more than 2 units, it's considered multifamily. We want to make sure we encourage these kind of developments, which used to be there in Houston in 1900s. We want to bring back that, and due to our current rules, it has become more onerous to build these type of units because we require a 28-foot private street, which is not needed because the property can be served, the firefighting services can happen from the public street. So that is one of the rules that we wanted to undo. Also, we wanted to make sure that we can allow up to 8 units on these properties. Basically, we want to encourage more small-scale multifamily developments and see if the fire services and all emergency services can be handled from the public street. Then we want to encourage more these kind of small-scale developments. And that's the purpose of the MURs. So here you can see in the standards that we are establishing these properties can be built on unrestricted lots or reserves. We established a size requirement that the reserve size has to be 50 feet frontage and a 50 feet right of way. The depth of the property from a public street that has a roadway cannot be more than 150 feet. And that is the purposes or requirements by the fire department. No more than minimum 3 units and maximum 8 units will be allowed on the property. No more than 3 stories, 2 to 3 stories height, a maximum height of 30 feet. Again, this is a requirement for firefighting purposes to be able to serve in case of emergencies. And properties at the intersection, we want to make sure that though we are encouraging more units, we still want the units to front the street and also make sure that there is adequate distance between the intersection and the driveway, so that 20 feet distance of is required for the driveways to maintain safety. And what else? The driveway width, if there is any alley access in the behind the property, the access should be coming from the alley. And the driveway width, maximum driveway width will be 16 feet with 4 feet curved radiuses. Radii. And building lines, we want the units to front the street, so we are encouraging more, we are encouraging smaller building lines. So 5 feet reduced building lines and along local and collector streets, 15 feet reduced building lines along major thoroughfares with 80 feet or less right of way. And they have to have an entry feature. So the 5 feet building line and the entry feature, which is only on the first floor, can encroach within that 5 feet. What this will do is this will make the streets more friendly, more walkable, and help the units face the street, and parking can be on the side or rear of the development. In terms of parking requirements, we are proposing that units smaller than 1500 square feet, they'll require 1 space per unit. So if you compare this with multifamily parking regulations are based on the number of bedrooms. So instead of that, we are establishing the parking based on the unit sizes, and 2 parking spaces if the units are larger than 1500 square feet. Again, if you remember, we established very beginning that per the demographics, there is a higher need for smaller units because the family sizes are shrinking. And there is demand for more smaller home sizes. And that's the purpose that we're encouraging more smaller units. And the market-based parking is common throughout all of the 4 types of housing, is that anytime the property is in vicinity of other modes of transit within half mile of bus routes and rail stations and park and rides, there will be opportunity to do 0 city minimum required. However, the property owner or the developer may choose to have whatever their need for parking is. If the property owner chooses to do 0 parking, then there will be a requirement that 1 bike parking space be provided per unit. We are also requiring guest parking space, 1 per every 6 units for the MURs. And the parking doesn't have to be under the units. It can be separate from the units, but it must be on the development, on the property. So that is MURs, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, committee, do we have questions about MURs? I do not see, I do see hand raised. Tammy, can you help me out?
Sean Masick and then Sandy Stevens.
Sean?
Just under the wire, you're about to call us. All right. Alley access versus fronting streets. I'd like a better description of that. In other words, some of these products our clients are asking for, call them a courtyard development off a alley that have, driveways into individual units. So the units might be facing open space, or the front door and driveways are facing the alley, but there's open space between the units and things like that, but they're not necessarily facing a public street or a public access easement type 2 roadway. Is that allowed within the way this is written or not?
Sean, thank you for the question. I think we're talking 2 different things. Here we're talking about MURs, where it's 1 property and mostly this is like rental units, versus the courtyard style development is the next one, which is lots surrounding a green space. So I think you're talking about courtyard style development where there will be lots around a green space.
So Sean, we may want to table your question till the next.
That's fine. I can wait.
Thing. Did you have anything else with
Nope.
as far as MURs? Okay, nope. Sandy. Sandy Stevens, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I just wanted a clarification on the parking. I realize what the parking requirements are, but if the units have less than 1,500 square feet, they will still be required to have guest parking. That's just a clarification.
Yes, they will be required to have parking.
Okay, guest parking. If the units are less than, I'm sorry. Okay, I guess I got turned around here. But they will be required 1 space for the renters, even if it's less than 1,500 square feet, unlike the ADUs.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I think I was thinking ADU when you were talking about guest parking. And so, yes, that clarifies. Thank you. Sorry.
No, not at all.
Sandy, one other thing I want to mention is this market-based parking that we're talking about only gives an exemption to this 1 parking space per unit, which is the standard requirement. But if they are in proximity to other modes of transit, then this 1 parking space per unit will not be required, but the guest parking space will still be required.
Thank you. Thank you. That is a concern as well. Thanks.
All right.
Any other questions on MURs?
There are no hands raised.
All right, we can go ahead, Subita. Thank you.
Okay, so the next one is courtyard style development. if you look at a courtyard style development and an MUR, when they are built, they may look kind of similar because they're units sitting on one big tract of land, but one is kind of rental and the other one is lots, fee simple lots sitting around a green space. So that will be a big difference. And in courtyard style development, all of the property is either platted as lots for to build the homes or a courtyard reserves, which will be like greens, excuse me, green space reserves or landscape reserves. And then there will be access drives, which in the ordinance language, if you read, I have called it courtyard access drive. And those access drives will provide access to the parking from the street. The courtyard access drive will provide access to the parking, and there will be pedestrian connections from the parking to the units if the parking is not underneath the structures. One thing to remember is when the courtyard style developments are designed, it is not possible to allow, or we are not recommending to allow multiple driveways from the public street. So there will be only one drive that goes into the property that takes cars to the back. I wish I had a design that I can share. And lots can front on courtyard. They can also front on an alley or a shared driveway or PAE, however you're planning to provide access to your lots. Or they can front on the courtyard access drive or pedestrian pathways. So the big difference why these courtyard style developments are not allowed today is because we don't allow lots that do not have public street frontage or a shared driveway frontage. So that is the biggest change we are making in the ordinance to allow the courtyard style developments. There will be another advantage to do courtyard style developments is there is no restrictions on the lot sizes or the lot width or the density of the development. The only criteria is that the height of the structure has to be neighborhood scale, so it has to be 30 feet or less. The minimum width of the property, depth of the property has to be 150 feet from the roadway or the public right of way, because again, for firefighting purposes, we don't want to have property that is too deep and fire cannot serve the property. This type of development will be allowed on a property that is 50 feet, has 50 feet frontage on a 50 feet public right of way. There is a limit on the lot sizes. They can't, sorry that I missed putting this in this document here, but the lot sizes cannot be larger than 3,500 square feet and the unit sizes cannot be larger than 1,500 square feet. All common areas must be within a common binding agreement. And the reason for this is that there is a lot of common area within a courtyard style development. The courtyards are common, the common access drive, the parking, all of those have to be maintained. So there will be like an HOA or a binding agreement that must be provided. In terms of access, if the property that you started with abuts an alley, especially if it is at the intersection of two streets and there is an alley, definitely encourage use of alley access. And if it's not possible to use the alley because of any encroachments or other concerns, then the access must come from the side street. Vehicular access could also be from shared driveway or PAEs. Individual driveways from public street will not be allowed. In terms of the frontage, 50% of the lots within the subdivision must face the main courtyard. The main courtyard size, there is a size limit on the main courtyard. The minimum size is 480 square feet. And on the opposing faces of the, in between there is a courtyard, the buildings on the opposing face, they should be at a distance of minimum 20 feet from each other. In terms of building line, again, we want to encourage the units facing the street, and therefore 5 feet reduced building lines along local and collector streets, 15 feet reduced building lines along major thoroughfares 80 feet or less, but the units must face the street with an entry feature. Again, this will make the streets more walkable and have the units facing the street, making the street more interesting. The entry feature can encroach into the 5-foot building line up to 4 feet, provided there is adequate room for utilities. And the parking is 1 parking space per unit if the units are less than 1,000 square feet, and 2 parking spaces per unit if the units are larger than 1,000 square feet. And the market-based parking if property is in the vicinity of other modes of transit. Guest parking, 1 per every 6 units. And parking must be located on the side or rear of the property. So we don't want parking to be in the front. Like I said, we want the units to face the street. Parking can be detached from the units, but it has to be within the development. So that's the end of the courtyard style development, and I'm ready for any questions. Mr. Chair, if you speak.
Yeah, sorry. Sean, would you ask your question again for the courtyard development? Thank you.
Yeah, this covers most of what I was asking about. What I was wondering about was a larger piece of property that's maybe 15 or 20 acres. I think it's somewhere in between these two that we just talked about. That, you know, a PAE maybe loops through the project and you have alleys or shared driveways taking you to these courtyards of products that are platted as individual lots.
All right, thank you. But your question was basically answered by Suvita already, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Tammy, I see that we have some hands up.
Curtis Davis.
Curtis, go right ahead, please.
Yes, just a request that this information be posted to your website with graphic illustrations.
Yes, it will be shortly. After you received the documents, we received the exhibits from our consultant. So with the images, it will be posted soon. But as presented to you, they're already posted and available for public to comment and all of you to comment also.
Yeah, yes, and it's well written and quite clear. I just know that there's some who would understand it more quickly and better with a graphic illustration. So if you plan to do that, great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, this is Dipti. The links are on the chat now for the website.
All right, good. Thank you. The links are on the chat. Tammy, anyone else? I don't see any other hands raised.
There are not any other hand raised.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions before we move on? This is, like I said, one of the things that we've been working on. This is the culmination of all the work that y'all have been doing for 2 years. So it's finally down on paper, and we want to thank staff and Suvita and everyone for going on this. Suvita, go ahead, please.
The last one is recommendations to narrow lots. I have to make it smaller a little bit to get it in the full page. So the second tabular format that you got is what has all of the things that you need to know about the narrow lots. And this is a condensed version, but basically the ordinance side by side that you received has all of this in the form of ordinance language also. Okay, so let's start here. The first thing to think about when someone has a property that has that is being planned for development, the first thing to look at the property and see is if the property is abutting an alley. And if the property abuts an alley, it is encouraged for development to use the alley access. If for whatever reason it's not possible to use the alley, then the next option is to go for shared driveways or private for PAEs. And it is, if possible, to connect those shared driveways or PAEs to the alleys. And in doing so, the provisions that are available are on the right side, which are general provisions. Basically, general provisions have all of the parking benefits, which is reduced parking and market-based parking. And that parking can be separate from the unit. And additional provisions have benefits of higher density requirement and being able to use lot size averaging and lot width averaging and reduce building line along local street and major thoroughfares. And also being able to encroach within the 15 feet visibility triangle if the alley is coming from the rear or side. If the property is at the corner, it is encouraged that alley access is used if there is an alley, and if there is no alley, side streets must be used to provide access. For example, flagged lots can be used, or shared driveway or private access easements can be used to provide access to the lots within the property. When the property is mid-block, or there is no alley, or there is alley but it's not possible to use the alley for access, then how are you planning to develop the property is the question. If creating lots wider than 40 feet, then individual driveway access will be allowed for the property as long as there is 22 feet curb space uninterrupted. If the property is being planned for lots narrower than 40 feet, those are referred to as narrow lots. And there is two options. If the property is, there are two options. The first option, the one that we want to encourage, is to use flag lot design or to use shared driveways or private streets and qualify for all of the additional provisions. If that's not possible and the property is smaller than 15,000 square feet, then vehicular access via a combined drive. And I want to show you an image of what that looks like. So let me take you to the presentation slides. And so this is what I mean when I say combined drive. And here you can see some examples of how a combined drive can function. So the one driveway, this is a property that used to be 5,000 square feet, 50 by 100 lot, and it was subdivided in the middle to create two 25 feet wide lots. And here one driveway, we are proposing that the maximum width of this driveway will be 24 feet, but it can be flared up to provide access, driveway access to both the properties. And here is an image that we are going to have in the ordinance of how that can be done. And here is another example where one driveway is providing access to two homes. In this example here, these are one car garages, versus in the example to the left, it's two car garages. So this is what we are calling combined driveway approach. So let me go back to the document again. So if the property is smaller than 15,000 square feet, this option of combined driveway approach is available. If the property is larger than 15,000 square feet, then the only option is to develop the property with either flag lot design or shared driveways or private streets. If the lots are already existing, then the lots will follow the requirements of what the plat has and what is available in IDM as per current standards. Additional standards for front loading lots with less than 40 feet frontage on a street or shared driveway are referred to as narrow lots. We already talked about that. The individual driveway maximum will be 12 feet. So just for lots less than 40 feet wide, the maximum width of an individual driveway will be 12 feet. So if you think of an example where you're creating 3 lots out of an original lot, 2 lots can share one drive, and the third lot will have an individual drive of maximum 12 feet width. The garage building line, we established consensus with the committee that 10 feet building line and 19 feet garage building line. Lots that front on a public street, we want to make sure that the home has a street facing front. So that's the reason for the 1/3 of the structure along the street must be occupiable space with facing the street. For lots narrower than 40 feet, it may not be possible to do the 1/3 facing the street. So for that reason, we want to allow balconies. So I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. This is the 1/3 occupiable space. So here is an example of a lot that is 40 feet or larger. That's the garage. And this space has to be wider than 1/3 of the frontage. And next slide. Here is an example of what that 1/3 will look like on narrow lots. And if this is not possible based on the site plan, then the second option is to do just balconies on the top. And this design is already done, like you can see these examples where there are balconies on the top to provide that street frontage. Okay, let's go back. And for properties that are side or rear loading, garages must be, if the access is coming from the alley, then there should be a certain distance of the garage from the alley. So that's the requirement which is already in the code. So this won't be in chapter 42, but it's already in the building code. Units along the street must provide an entry feature facing the street. And flag lots cannot be longer than 200 feet from the street right of way. So again, this is for firefighting purposes. We don't want the flag lots to be longer than 200 feet because then fire cannot service the property. And guest parking reserves must be located within the private property. So this is one of the changes that was requested by the committee members, and that is also within the ordinance language. So these are all of the standards that we discussed with the committee, and the benefits of doing rear access and side access are listed here, which is the higher density and reduced building lines, and the being able to encroach from the second floor into the visibility triangle. And flag lots can have a width less than 16 to 20 feet staff, and all of the staff doesn't have to be paved. So these are all of the requirements about narrow lots. With that, I'll take questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that there are lots of questions. So I do not see any hands raised. And here we go, Tammy.
Mike Dishberger.
Mike, go ahead, please.
I would ask that we have more time to discuss this one page at the next meeting. I could spend time, I'm gonna spend time on a few of these items. Each line has issues. Some of them are good. By the way, the MRUs are great. Courtyards are great. We're all for those. No issues. Let's start with the common driveway. That's the biggie. And Savita, could you put that picture up of that common driveway, please? That drawing you had?
This one?
Right there. All right. Let's all take a look at this, people. How you drive in on the left-hand unit. We'll talk about the left-hand unit first. You drive in and you can park on the right side of your garage. To get to the left side of your garage, you're going to have to make a bunch of little turns to get in there without going into your grass. And by the way, this is what traffic has you do at Public Works. They won't allow you to run that driveway straight back to the property line. They will not let you do that. And so a bunch of things happen here. One, the place on the left is unusable now, especially if you try to park a car on the right side of your driveway there. When you pull out of your garage in the morning, if there's a car there, you're gonna have to do like a 7-point turn to get out of there. Super unsafe. First of all, you can go into the ditch. Most of the properties inside Loop 610 have open ditches, okay? There's not many curb and gutter. So you're gonna go in the ditch, and traffic will not allow you to put a curb there to keep from backing in. So what they do is make you draw this thing you drew that guarantees you're not gonna go into the ditch, but you're gonna hit somebody, you're gonna hit another car. It does not take into account, because we are allowed a 10-foot building line, which is normally supported by a post. I don't know how you get your car out of the garage, even with the 19 feet. You'll smash that post once or twice and I guess learn something. This is not market-based. I don't think anybody on this call today would say they would live in that property, left or right, and not want something else like we're doing now. It's not market-based. I've not seen any market studies from planning saying, oh, people in Houston want this product. They do not want this product. I don't think anybody here wants this product. You want other people to have it, but not yourself. So this is crazy. There's also a lot of, as I go through chapter 42, all the red lines, there's a lot of small errors in language, and there are no such things as common driveways, combined driveways. The public works only considers one thing: shared driveways. This is called a shared driveway. We have things in here, again, that's an approach in the front, that's a driveway in the back. It requires maintenance agreements between homeowners or HOAs to handle this. What if you have, again, this is probably the worst thing on here, and I'll stop there, but there's other issues. We'll talk about alleys later, but I'll let other people talk, but GHDA is absolutely against this. This is probably, most of the things we've been talking about have been great, but as they say, it's devil in the details. And the reason why this was produced in the first place was to provide parking on the street, which we've learned since last year that neighbors can go ahead and get no parking signs put up on their street, if your street's less than 20 feet, with only one person requesting it. It doesn't take a petition or anything. So we're trying to provide parking. We're taking away a parking space, putting something on the street that will get no parking sign and have less parking. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else? Tavita, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to Mike's statement and or query.
Just noted.
All right, good enough. Anyone else? Okay,
this is Megan. I'm sorry, I don't have my hand up and I can't find the button.
Go ahead, Megan.
Just a couple questions. Has Public Works reviewed this and okayed the radiuses?
Public Works is looking at the graphics that we received. Overall, because we are proposing reduced parking, imagining that the homes are 1,500 square feet, then one car garages will definitely function well, as you can see in the picture to the right. On the left side, we are looking at what kind of turning templates, looking at the turning templates to see what kind of garage building line will help address the concerns that Mike brought up. But that research is happening.
Okay, so Public Works hasn't approved the drawings yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Then I have a question too, because I mean, I believe the intent of the less driveway, or one of the major intents, was to provide more on-street parking. Is that correct?
That is one of the reasons, committee member. Yes, that is one of the reasons, and there are other reasons, mainly that we want to make sure all of the paving with continuous driveways, all of the paving that happens in the public right-of-way is causing a challenge with the city's drainage system, and the continuous driveways will cause issues with other public users of the streets, because the sidewalks are interrupted multiple times with driveways, and it's with cars parked across the sidewalk, it's not possible to use the sidewalks. And also on-street parking, it helps preserve on-street parking space. So those were some of the reasons why this was discussed in detail.
Is the on-street parking is do the residents that are living in an existing neighborhood, do they have the right to put up to get permitted parking only or no parking signs put up?
No, it's not the private property owner. Sorry, I hear echo. It's not the private property owners putting the signs up. I think Mike was talking about a situation where if the paving width of the street is narrower than a certain width, I think narrower than 18 feet, then there is public works requirement that there will be no parking signs on one side of the street if the paving is certain width. And if it is much narrower, like 15 feet or something, there is no parking signs on both sides when there are shared driveway and PAE type of developments happening in the block. That's the concern that Mike is bringing up.
Okay, I had heard that there is a mechanism for residents to apply for no parking signs on their street, but that isn't the case. Is that what you're saying, that it's only by a criteria?
It probably is possible to request it. I'm not aware of the criteria fully, so I would not comment.
This is Margaret. Can I answer that? There is a process for property owners to apply, but it must meet certain criteria in order to be accepted. So it's kind of a combination of both what Savita's saying and what you're asking.
So I just hate that. I mean, I think it's just something we need to think about, because I agree. I mean, I think there's so much, there's a lot of benefit when there's on-street parking, especially around larger developments. And it would be a shame that if, that was the intent, and then to provide it and it could go away without really anyone realizing why the on-street parking went away. So this might be something to think about, how we balance. If you do have, a developer, a builder that plans for a shared driveway, plans to use the alley, what mechanisms could stop people from parking in the public right of way, which was probably the intent and the reason that was done.
And Megan, that has happened. I mean, we've seen it happen, that we have a good development that's a shared driveway that has the right access, provides a high quality pedestrian realm, and for one reason or another, there's a no parking sign. And we've been working with Public Works on trying to resolve some of these issues. And I think we've made some headway on a number of them, including the 18-foot driveway. I mean, the 18-foot street width.
All right, good. No, great. I just want to bring that up, Margaret, as
Thank you.
like you want to put out a carrot and then you don't want to take it away once it's built. So I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Margaret. Who else, Tammy, has their hand up?
Mike Disberger has his hand raised again.
Mike, go ahead, please.
Everybody's tired, doesn't want to talk about this.
Mike, can I interrupt you for a second? I don't know if it's just me, but I am having a really hard time hearing you.
Yeah.
You're like in a tunnel.
I'm in a tunnel?
Is there any way you can get closer to your microphone?
Yes, I can. You hear me now?
Turn up your volume.
You hear me? Everybody get
It's just so much echo.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'm on Teams is bad on my computer for some reason. I know we're talking to Public Works, especially about alleyways.
Now we're not hearing anything.
Not hearing.
Mike, are you there? I can hear you.
Okay.
Margaret, can you? Savita, can you all hear?
I can hear Mike, not clearly, but
yeah, Mike, you're just gonna have to speak slowly and clearly, which is not your strong suit.
You got it, Sonny. I will speak slower.
Thank you.
I know we are working with Public Works on some of these issues. The issue that builders and developers have in Houston has been brought forward before it is Public Works works off design manuals. They can change their design manuals any day they want. They can change them tomorrow morning. They can change them next month. They can pass it after we get this ordinance, chapter 42 passed. So I guess I want to see language in there saying only if the IDM manual doesn't change, you can do this, this, and this. Also, right now, the reason why shared driveways are not allowed on 18-foot streets is because 2 sessions ago, chapter 42, with the fire department for safety said if the road is 18 feet or less, you cannot use a shared driveway because they cannot get down the road in time. And so we're kind of going backwards here on that if we're talking about safety. But I'm going to suggest something on the alleyways that we keep bringing forward. If it's a city maintained alleyway on that list they have, which is 9.5 miles of road of alleyway that's been accepted by the city, yes, tell the builder they have to use the alleyway. But these alleyways on the corner, got to work out detention and things. It's they're taken over by people. That's the easiest thing. That's a win for everybody. Force us, if a city maintained or accepted alleyway, make us do that. Not a problem. But I'm sorry y'all can't hear me today, so thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right, anyone else? All right, then I am not Savita. You can go ahead and continue.
Yes, sir. Oh, Curtis Davis just dropped his hand up.
Oh, Mr. Davis, go ahead, please.
Yes, in support of Mike's comments and concerns, I think a close coordination with Public Works on this is going to be crucial because we're looking at very tight tolerances. Things like, in their design manuals using pickup truck standards like a vehicle like the Ford F-150 or something like that. Those kinds of issues are key in order to make these tight tolerances work. And so I want to encourage close attention to the concerns that Mike is raising.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else? All right, I do not see any more hands raised. Tammy, do you?
There are no more hands raised.
Thank you so much. Savita, go right ahead, please. Oh, wait, I see one.
It's a member of the public. She's on the public comments at the end.
Okay. Just so you know, again, the raise your hand is for subcommittee members only. You'll have an opportunity to speak at the end of the meeting during public comment. Please put your name in the chat so that we can call on you. All right, Savita, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is to talk about homework activities and next steps. And sorry, I didn't mention, thank you all for your comments. We will definitely consider all your comments. And we are working, as we work through the language, we will work with Public Works to make sure all of these are possible in terms of the turning radiuses and how these can work in IDM as well. With that, I want to invite Tammy for homework activities and next steps.
Tammy, go right ahead.
Okay, so committee members, your next steps or your homework is to review the different documents that we gave to you last week. Those are the documents that we discussed in detail today, to continue to spread the word throughout your representative advocacy and general reach. And then also, if you think your group could benefit from us giving a presentation on anything presented to you, please reach out to us. And we would love to meet with any of your groups to go through anything more in particular or in broad strokes, whatever you think would be beneficial to your peoples. And next steps overall is to provide public comment by March 3rd. That's in a couple weeks. And then we are planning to present the housing recommendations to the Planning Commission on March 16th to begin that public comment period. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tammy. I was muted. Apologies again. Any questions for Tammy at this point in time? I see a hand raised.
Matthew Camp.
I'm sorry, is whom?
Matthew Camp has his hand raised.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a quick question. She kind of covered it there, but asked this in the chat. Is there a kind of a target final date for both of these ordinance, the housing and the conservation districts, to get their final vote or an updated timeline?
What I wanted to say was conservation districts, right now it's going to the council for public hearing, and that is all we know right now about the conservation districts, at least me. For housing recommendations, we are planning to get your feedback on the proposed draft that you received, the side-by-side, by March 3rd. And we anticipate a tentative date of presenting these to the Planning Commission on March 16th and open a public hearing. Based on how the timeline works, it is more than likely that we want to take the housing recommendations to the City Council end of May. Did that answer your question, sir?
Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
Sorry, I keep calling you Mike, Matthew. It's Mike
It's okay.
Dishwasher's fault. Okay.
No
Sorry.
worries.
All right. Anyone else? Questions? All right, Savita.
Lisa Clark just popped her hand up.
Lisa, go right ahead, please. You might be muted. I'm not hearing you. You're muted. Okay, try again. No, not
Sign language?
here. Pardon me?
The sign language, no, maybe chat.
No, Lisa, I'm sorry.
Penny.
We can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. I can see that your mic is muted. Try now. No. My nefarious plan worked for the co-chair. No, Lisa, we can't hear you. Do you want to put something in the chat and someone will read it for you? Okay. So bear with us while we do some typing here. All right, in the meantime, is there anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing.
So committee members, before I forget, so before March 3rd, please send any of your comments, suggestions, concerns, anything that you want to share about the side-by-side. I would appreciate every single word comment that you will provide us. So please provide your comments.
Okay, Savita, can you see, Lisa Clark is saying, if we present to Planning Commission 316, will we give consideration to Mike's request to take some time on the narrow lots?
I'll answer that. So we'll spend the next week looking at Mike's suggestions and have an answer prior to going on the 13th. We'll either have an updated ordinance or a response back to him. But I said 13th, that's not the date. 16th?
16th.
16th.
Yeah.
And then Lisa says, meaning will we consider separating this issue?
Oh, that's a, I guess we would. Yeah, I mean, I guess we would consider separating it. I don't know. No, the challenge that we have is, well, yes, we consider separating it.
Yeah.
We just answered it.
All right, well, yeah, based on what we learn, I suppose, we'd make that decision at a later date.
Yes, we would probably make the decision at a later date based on what comes out of our discussions. I think all of this is all together. It's a critical part of the whole discussions. So yes.
Okay. All right then. So with that, we are finished. I think.
Sunny, can I ask one more question? It's Megan, Sunny. One more question.
Go ahead, Megan. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. On the conservation districts, will this group meet again to kind of get some answers to the questions we had today before council does vote?
I don't know that we'll meet again. We will certainly keep you abreast of what's happening. We'll let you know. We'll send you revised ordinance. We'll send you updated dates and things like that. I'm at this point, I'm not going to commit that we will meet again, although that's not a bad idea.
I would strongly suggest it if at all possible. I think it would, I mean, we all put so much work into this, and to not review it one more time as a group, I think is a little disheartening.
Okay, I hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. All right, with that, we will move on to public comment. And Tammy, are you handling that or someone else?
Teresa, I think.
Teresa, are you there? Teresa? Teresa? Teresa, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry for the delay in unmuting. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, not a problem. So do we have people signed up for public comment?
There are 4 public speakers that we know of. The first is Richard Mazzarino, followed by Diane Almos Guzman. I will time them for 2 minutes each for you, sir.
Before we start that, Teresa, someone wrote into the chat, they're just looking for an address or an email address to send comments to. Can we give that address
I'll
out?
put it in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so our first speaker again is whom?
Richard
Richard.
Mazzarino, Mazzarino.
Mr. Mazzarino, we can see you here. Go ahead, please. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, everybody. You pronounced that perfectly, actually. I just wanted to share a few of my comments as well on all this stuff as both a builder and owner in the city. One of my concerns about pushing more common driveway projects is, I'm sure all of you have seen, I'm sure you've toured a lot of neighborhoods, these common driveway projects push an inordinate amount of cars into public parking. Many of them have 3 bedrooms, and when you have 3 bedrooms and no driveway to park an extra car in, if you have 3 roommates, you're going to automatically be pushing an extra car out in the public parking on the streets. And city ordinance does require that any cars utilizing public streets for parking be moved every 24 hours. So that could create a parking situation for the city, pushing more cars to the streets. Also, I'm a fairly avid cyclist for recreational purposes. And if anybody else on this call cycles on the streets, we've all probably agree that cars parked on the streets versus in driveways creates a dangerous situation for us cyclists because it reduces visibility of cars coming out of driveways. You get car doors opening and that creates a danger to us. It pushes cyclists further to the middle of the road, closer to traffic when you have more cars parked on the street. And you also have to worry about cars pulling out in front of you as you're riding up behind them. I hope you guys have taken all that into consideration as well with pushing more cars into the street parking. Another thing I wanted to comment on was the 17-foot versus 19-foot garage door building line. I live in a neighborhood that has sporadic sidewalks, and we have a neighbor that drives a Mini Cooper, which is 12 feet long, and parks it over the sidewalk every day of the week. The house is plenty far back. There's plenty of room to pull all the way up to the garage door, but that neighbor chooses to block the sidewalk. We call 311, we call and complain just because I'm a proponent of following the rules, and absolutely nothing gets done. So whether the parking lot setback is 17 feet or 19 feet, you got to get citizens to actually do the right thing or have some kind of consequences for blocking sidewalks. And also I'm concerned if we push it back further to 19 feet, you could get the same homeowners trying to now park 2 cars front to back in the driveway because the distance from the end of the from the sidewalk to the street in a lot of streets in the city are elongated, creating kind of, however you want to call it, some kind of additional buffer where that extra 2 feet, homeowners might get a little more cavalier and be able to park cars front to back, blocking sidewalks and even potentially pushing them out into the streets. I don't know how much time I've got left, but our conservation districts.
All right. Did you have a question about conservation districts?
My only thing is all the builders on this call, I know we do a lot of work in the Heights, and I think we all know that building in historic districts is tedious, time consuming, and very expensive. And lots that sell in historic districts sell for less money, and they take longer to sell than non-historic lots in these areas. And I wonder if that fact, and there's anecdotal evidence from the Houston Association of Realtors, if that is being impressed upon these homeowners who, a lot of them, these houses that they've owned for generations are their retirement, and they want to sell to a builder like us for the highest and best use of their property and get maximum dollars. And if there's additional restrictions put on it that they may not fully understand, it can seriously cap the value and potentially cap the appreciation of these investments they've made. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Mazzarino. We appreciate it. Okay, Teresa, our next speaker.
The next speaker signed by chat and may want to publicly comment, Diane Almos Guzman, ALMOS-GUZMAN.
Ms. Almos, Ms. Goodman, are you there?
She had to leave. She put her question in the
I saw
chat.
that. All right. Can you read that, Tammy? I'm not seeing
Yeah,
it.
of course. In the enabling ordinance, is there consideration for culture and environmental preservation? Good job, committee.
All right. Thank you so very much. Our next speaker.
Is Mike Young, Y-O-U-N-G.
Mr. Young, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, so I'm also a builder, and I would echo the concerns of Mr. Mazzarino a second ago that the initial concept behind a lot of what was happening was to help preserve parking. And I'm the builder that actually fits a lot of what you're asking for in terms of providing shared driveway product. But I also understand that shared driveway product at a guest parking rate of 1 spot for every 6 homes ultimately does force people to park outside the community. So having front load homes where you have a individual driveway that can fit 2 vehicles, in essence, creates a whole lot more parking opportunities than forcing into a shared driveway product. So anything that we're doing, I understand the balance, but anything that we're doing where we are able to preserve that, first of all, because that is what the market is asking for in my regard as well. But we also do affordable homes. We also do higher density, lower sales price homes. And when we lay out a site, having that option of, especially if it doesn't neatly lay out, so to speak, for a shared driveway, having that option to where we can incorporate some front loaders into the community to maximize the density also helps us keep the home prices down. So a lot of the conversation in regards to front load homes is relative to it's relative to parking. It might be relative to, the heights in some of these inner loop, inner 610 communities, but also understand that when we push this through in an ordinance where we're limiting what we can do with that, we're also affecting density in other areas in the city of Houston where that option of having having front load homes helps us deliver a lower price product to be able to better match, buyers that are closer to median income. So I would just like to make that known for the group. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. All right, our next speaker.
David Hightower had a comment in the chat. If you'd like to state it publicly, this would be his time.
All right, sir, are you there? I'm not
No,
seeing.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else?
Not known, sir. No other speakers.
There are 2 people that requested to speak, Joe Dunham and Marie L. Carlisle.
All right, Mr. Dunham, are you there?
Hi, this is Joe Dunham. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go. We can hear you. Go right ahead.
Hey, I have a little bit different perspective. I also am a home builder, but I also own a business on a street that the city just spent a ton of money redoing. It's beautiful. I don't know if y'all are all familiar with Wakefield over Garden Oaks, Oak Forest area, but
Did we lose her?
I'm sorry, just somebody asked me a question. I had to step out for just a moment.
Chair, you're muted.
We lost the speaker, I think.
Yes, I think we lost the speaker. So whoever the speaker was, please speak if you can again, and come. Mr. Garza, you're muted.
Apologies. All right. I'm sorry, where were we? Our last speaker was Joe, and did she finish?
Miss Jo Dunham appears to have been lost off of the speaker. If she's available, we'd like her to resume speaking at this time.
Okay. Miss Dunham, are you there? Miss Dunham? I do not see her. All right, let's go on with our next speaker and we'll come back to her.
Hi, this is I'm sorry, Marie Carlisle. I think I was next. First, I want to say thank you all for your time and effort to putting this in. One comment I'd like to make on the MURs, and just as a side note, I'm just a resident, not a developer, but I live in an area where I'm seeing development similar to MURs, although probably not exactly that. And something I'd like for you to consider with respect to parking and availability on the property are issues for other community services like landscaping and trash. I know you guys consider, like the fire trucks and their ability to access them, but one issue I've seen is when they have a common landscaper come, especially if they're on a 2-lane road, the landscaper can't park on site. So they park and block a full lane of that 2-lane road for several hours while they're working in the community. I've also seen some of the private trash trucks do the same. So park there, and those are shorter in duration, maybe like 15 minutes, but they park on the street, then go and get each trash can and bring it. So it's just something else to consider that is an impact, especially if you have several of those in a row, it can dramatically impact the drivability on those 2-lane roads. And my second question, and if this question is better for email, I'm happy to follow up with somebody on that. But with respect to the conservation communities, is that something where you could take existing deed restrictions from a neighboring property and use those substantively to apply to a conservation district? I realize they wouldn't be deed restrictions, but is that something where you could kind of implement that so that the neighboring community could be more consistent, or is that a no-go? And again, if that's better for email, I'm happy to follow up.
Yeah, no, I think if you could put your contact information in the chat, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And then staff will get back with you. But I think just the quick answer to your question is, as the director said, since those are going to be decided with the community, I see no reason why you couldn't get some of those strictures that are put in the next neighborhood and maybe review them and, if possible, overlay them into your conservation district. I don't know why that wouldn't be able to be considered.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Carlisle. Thank you. Ms. Dunham, are you back? Joe Dunham? No, I'm not seeing. Anyone else wanted to ask a question or make a statement during public comment? All right, hearing none. Margaret, Subita, do we have anything else that you wanted to? I'm sorry, is there someone else who wanted to address public comment?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment if possible. My name is Ben Gobin, G-O-B-I-N.
All right, Ben, go right ahead.
Yeah, so we did a shared drive community out in the Heights area. And what ended up happening is just like it was mentioned before, we had some residents who had roommates, and we were able to park on the street, but then one of the neighbors further back complained, and then the city came by and put no parking on the side of the street. So that's just an example of some things that can happen in these situations that we faced anyways while building.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, anything else, sir?
Yeah, also, if we have to move the driveways back, then that's just going to force, because already on lots of these, we don't have much of a backyard. So we're going to have to shrink the whole size of the home. And so that's going to make the square foot cost go up even further. And we're trying to have affordable housing. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, Joe Dunham is back. Joe, can you hear me?
Can you hear me is the question.
Yeah. Yes.
Man,
And
sorry about that.
Yes, we can.
Woo, I was trying so hard to get back in. Hey, no, so thanks for taking my call back. So I live on a street where the city just spent a ton of money redoing our street on Wakefield. And we do have a couple different common driveway developments here. And so many of them park outside, especially if they have a family over or friends over. But right after we spent 2 years with this street torn up, they came in and made an entire side of the road no parking. Now people are having to park around the corner from their own house. I have a different perspective that I have a business on this street. and a side business, and now people cannot park in front of my business. Luckily, I have a large driveway, but most businesses, there's bars and all kinds of things on my street, don't have that luxury. And the sad thing is they came in and without any regard to which side would make more sense to make no parking. There is a good 450 linear feet on Wakefield that is unobstructed that they made no parking, where the other side of the street is the side that they decided to let people park. So I don't understand some of these things that they do. And I understand y'all are not in control of that specific situation, but I wanted to give it to you as an example that these sound like beautiful ideas, this common driveway thing, but people need places to park in front of their houses. And these front loading houses seems to be the best answer because fitting in there, people can park better. But also a couple people talked about the cars blocking the sidewalk and that obstructing the roads. It's illegal to block the sidewalk. It sounds like several of y'all know that, but that someone should get a ticket for that. As a home builder, that's what I do for my main job. I actually got a ticket for this one time many years ago. So I don't know where the person that wrote tickets for that is, but I personally never ever block a sidewalk because I personally have gotten a citation for that. But I also just wanted to make a quick statement, if I could, about all these bicycle path areas where we're taking high traffic areas like Shepherd, Durham, 11th Street, high areas of traffic, combining it, smushing them down from a 4-lane to a 2-lane road, and then adding a full bicycle lane on each side. I just don't see how condensing the traffic is going to make things any better or safer for these cyclists. So anyway, I know 2 minutes is fast, but thanks for letting me say that.
Well, thank you, Ms. Dunham. We appreciate your participation and glad you could get back on.
Yep, thank you.
All right, anyone else? All right, then, I'm not hearing none. With that, you have committee members, you have your assignments. Thank you so very much. Suvita, did you want to close this meeting? Before I close it, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate all the comments, and we'll wait for your written comments on the ordinance.
Director Wallace Brown, Suvita, Co-Chair Lisa Clark, thank you so very much. I appreciate everyone's contribution today, and we will hopefully see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.